now, let me welcome Johanna, Philip, and Kristen. So let's start with Kristen. Kristen, you're actually brand new to me. I met you in San Francisco. You came to the Immunotherapy Patient Summit there, and you shared this very compelling story. So why don't you tell everyone who you are and a little bit about your cancer journey. When were you diagnosed? What were you diagnosed with?
Okay. My name is Kristin Kleinhofer, and I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 7 years ago. I went through the standard chemotherapy protocol. That's a 2-year intense treatment, and it did successfully put me in remission. And for 1.5 years, I lived life. I got a second chance. I was doing good, but it came back. And so at that point, they tried salvage chemotherapy efforts, and those did not work. And so the options are very limited for me. And I remember I enrolled in another clinical trial. It was another use of combination chemotherapy, so more chemotherapy. And I remember the doctor mentioned, Kristen, you might be interested in immunotherapy, CAR T-cell treatment. And back in 2014, when this occurred, I did not know what that was. My mom ran home, she did research, and at that time, she found information from the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. June, where they were talking about the CAR T-cell treatment. And it made so much sense, using your own immune system to fight cancer. Because obviously, particularly in my case and many others, standard chemotherapy protocols are just not working. The cancer is getting too resistant and getting smarter. So she came to me and she said, Kristen, we have to do this. So we talked to my oncologist and said, this is what we want to pursue. And she was on board with that. And so I had a really great medical team. And at that time, the only clinical trials that were going on for CAR T-cell treatment was at the University of Pennsylvania, and then also at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center in Seattle. And so my doctor reached out to both of them. We also had a contact in Seattle that my Stanford doctor, I'm from California, was also knew the PI for the trial at Fred Hutch. And then I also started reaching out to Fred Hutch in Seattle to try to find out more information. Was I eligible for it based on my story? And they said that I was. And so the next step then was for me to meet with a private investigator for the clinical trial and to hear from him in person about the trial. And, given my history, it was the next best step for me, given that there are limited and no options really available to fight my cancer. And so I went ahead and based on the information, the very thorough information that I was informed with, in terms of how the process would be, the benefit that it could be for me, which is obviously the gift of more time, and any risks that were associated were ones that I was willing to take. I had been through a long journey with chemotherapy and had many, many side effects. And to me, the side effects of CAR T-cell treatment were not fearful to me, and they were very minor. And so I did go ahead and I enrolled in that trial. So it was really fun because they they extract your blood products and they filter them and they take out your white blood cells and in there is your T cells. And then they take it to the lab and they engineer these T cells and so that they have receptors that will go out there and search for your cancer and kill it. So once they re-engineer them, they grow them in the lab until they're in the millions. And then they go ahead and schedule your infusion. So you get injected with these cells. And on the day of the infusion, I was wearing my Choose Hope t-shirt because for me, immunotherapy has been hope, hope for a gift of more time. And my mantra has always been, once you choose hope, anything is possible. And so I sat there, I had my 1-hour infusion, and they told me it could be anywhere from a day to 3 weeks that they saw for patients that there would be an anticipated cytokine release syndrome, which is that your immune system gets activated with all these killer T cells that they injected into you. And that's what you want. That means it's eating up the cancer. And so I like to envision Pac-Man, just like eating up the little cancer cells in my body, a child of the 70s. So So that's what I envisioned. And about the fourth day after my infusion, I did have the cytokine release syndrome, and it was all the side effects that they had told me were very common. So it's very much like a flu. You just feel, you have high fevers. I had like 102 fever. You have body chills and muscle aches. And so they admit you to the hospital to watch you. And I did develop some low blood pressure, but it didn't cause any harm. It was just that they were watching me to make sure I was okay. And so it really, for me, really wasn't that bad. And it lasted over a course, I think it was in the hospital for about 5 days. And then I got back released to outpatient monitoring on a daily basis. And so the trial was about 2 months. And for me, being that I am from California, I was willing to take that risk to travel to Seattle to enroll in that clinical trial as I hope for a gift of more time. I was successful a month after my treatment. They did a bone marrow biopsy, and I was in remission. So I was very successful. And we talked to the PI again, and he said, Kristen, it is still in its early stages. And I want to be honest with you that there are people that choose to not forgo further treatment, but we don't know how long that might last, the remission. And so some people do choose that. But in my case, and it was advised as well by my medical team, that for me, proceeding with a stem cell transplant would be then the next step following the CAR T cell treatment. And so, again, that was another journey that I took. And because I had no match, I enrolled in another clinical trial, which was also at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center, where they use double umbilical cord blood from 2 infants as your stem cells for your transplant.
Let's pause there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Philip, now you had a completely different type of cancer and received a different type of treatment. You didn't receive a CAR T-cell therapy. Why don't you tell us when you first found out you had cancer and then what happened?
Yeah, I'm Philip Prichard from Memphis. I found out I had stage 4 kidney cancer in July of 2012. Right before our anniversary. Nice. But yeah, they discovered a giant 3.8 pound tumor sitting on my right kidney. Didn't know it had been there. Didn't feel it at all. And I started having. The only reason I knew something was wrong was there was urine in my blood, and so yeah, that kind of clued me in, and I was tired, and anyway, so I went into the doctor on a Monday. They sent me to surgery on Friday. Removed the tumor. Thought it was all done. The tumor's gone. Everything's good. And a couple months later, the tumor came back, and it had metastasized. It was on my adrenal gland, my vena cava, and moving into my liver. And so went back into surgery, and they weren't able to operate on it this time. So we had kind of lost all hope there, and we were like, all right, what are we going to do? I'm going to have to go down traditional, chemo road. And my wife got on the phone, and we discovered MD Anderson. So we went down to MD Anderson, and we were like, let's see if we can get the doctors there to remove this. And that's when we discovered the clinical trial for, at that time it was just a number, but for nivolumab or Opdivo. And it was kind of a coin toss for me. I'd been on another kind of targeted drug before, Votrient, but that's how I got accepted into this trial. And they put me on Opdivo, and after about the first 3 months, the tumor had started to reduced by about 30%, and started feeling better. Definitely, I knew I had more energy. I could actually get in and out of the planes, and we were traveling from Memphis to Houston every other Tuesday. So, and we did that for 3 months. And I guess like I said, I was there for every other Tuesday for 3 months, and then or every other Tuesday for 3 years, and I came off last April, and with no signs, little scarring tissue on my liver, but other than that, everything's looking good.
That's incredible. So the drug that you received is a checkpoint inhibitor. It's one of those things that takes the brakes off your immune system that Dr. Gandhi described earlier today.
Yep.
So Johanna, now you don't have prostate cancer. Your husband, Andy, does. Can you tell us kind of what, from the caregiver's perspective, when a loved one faces cancer, and you've actually got some experience of your own with cancer to share, what is that process like? And then when did you realize that you needed to consider other options like a clinical trial?
Yeah, okay, so Andy got diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he'd been going to the doctor for like a year and a half. He had all sorts of symptoms, but it was never diagnosed. And he finally had a biopsy, and we got the phone call on a Friday night at 8:30. So you know that's not good, right?
Yeah.
And as a caregiver, like, you're just, it's not you, but all you want to do is help. And I did have cancer when I was in my 20s. And I was not like Janie, who I have so much respect for. She did it on her own, and she figured out everything out on her own. I had my mom. And now I'm going to cry because she's here. She really came and took care of me. And she was the one who really was like, meeting with the doctors and saying, she's going to cry, it's going to be okay, because I'm a crier. Anyway, so now it was my turn. And so I had a really good roadmap because I had learned all this from my mom. And we knew immediately, that it was not good. As every patient and caregiver in here knows, trying to get the appointments, even when you know it's bad, is hard, right? So you call, first thing was we got a recommendation for someone locally. And we called, and they're like, oh yeah, we can see you in a few weeks. It's like, no, we can't wait a few weeks. So you have to keep pushing and pushing. So we got in pretty quickly. And then the next thing was, okay, that's our local. They said, we got to get you on hormone therapy right away, and then chemotherapy. It's like, okay, we've got a roadmap. We've got something to do. So then we said, all right, let's go to the next thing. So we have UCSF near us. And that's a big center. We got some famous people there that know what they're doing. So same thing, calling, trying to get in. They're like, yeah, we can see you in a couple of months. Really pushed, explained how serious the situation was. We got in within a week. So we get in there, and they're like, yes, this is pretty bad. So we're going to do hormone therapy and then chemotherapy, and then we're going to look and see maybe surgery, maybe radiation. So you're like, okay, now we've gone to the next place, and we've got another option. But then we had also heard about MD Anderson, and we actually had the name of someone, Dr. Logothetis, to go see. So same thing, had to call. We didn't have the insurance at the time that covered anything. It was going to be all our expense. But it was at the end of the year, so we were able to switch that. Took some fighting to get in there, got in there. And then it was, okay, yeah, it's good. Firmagon's good, chemo's good, and then we're going to see what happens, but we're definitely going to do something else, and it ended up being surgery. So then at the end of that, there were no clinical trials for us. There weren't any. But things changed so rapidly, right, in this area, that by the time the surgery was done, it was all of a sudden like, hey, there's a clinical therapy, and it was, I can't say the whole word, so I call it IPI. Andy's was IPI. and you had that whole list of questions like, what's in it for me? We didn't ask any questions. We're like, yes, please. We are all in. Right. And it was good. He was supposed to have 4 rounds of IPI. He only had 3 because the side effect was these crazy rashes. He started getting the crazy rashes. But as Dr. Logothetis said, think of your skin as the smoke detector for your body. Yeah. So it's like, if that's happening, then it's working. And so that happened, and he was without treatment for a year and a half. And he's not without disease. He's not ever going to be without disease. But he wasn't even supposed to be around, let alone not on anything. So that was really great. His PSA came up a little bit. He's been doing some other different things, but he's doing pretty well. So we feel very fortunate that we were able to get into the clinical.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Really
And very wonderful to hear about how your mother was able to help you. So thank you for sharing that. It's okay
She's
to
a rock
cry.
star.
So it sounds like clinical trials for each one of you was kind of like, no brainer, which isn't the case for everyone.
Right.
So did you have any fears or concerns about going into a trial, or did it just like, this is it, this is what we do? Johanna, let's start with you.
So this is it. This is what we do. I mean, we were so excited. It was not a good, the prognosis was not good. So anything that was a chance, you had to grab at it, and it's been really good. Oh, and I have one other thing to say too. It came up from Janie, it's come up from everybody, it came up from the doctors for sure. This whole idea of a partnership with the doctors is huge. And in the beginning, it was really hard because Andy still has a local doctor and his MD Anderson doctor, and there's all this competition between us. There's all this crazy stuff. But in the end, they all work together, and they work there's such a team with Andy. And, he had pain the other day. It was, Sunday night. He was really feeling bad. He texted the doctor. 10 seconds later, he's got a response. He's got a prescription that he's going to get filled. He's like, you need to let me know in 6 hours if it's working. It's like 3 a.m. Texas time. He's like, you need to text me, and he did, and he texts back. So that partnership is also so important. And to be, as a patient, a part of that. And for me, they always put me on the calls and everything if I'm not there. And just that partnership is really important. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, for me it was let's do this. I was actually excited about being the guinea pig. So
yeah.
But yeah, my wife and I we were very excited about getting on something. We had never heard of clinical trials before MD Anderson, and so when it came up, it was go, let's do this. This is something that sounds like it's on the cutting edge, and that's, and it'll help other people, and that was kind of my outlook. It's like, let's do this. I want to help other people, help myself, but help other people. If this drug works, then I can be a part of that, and it was very exciting.
Yeah, and then for me as well, just because the options were limited, when they mentioned immunotherapy and the CAR T-cell treatment, and we saw the video of Dr. June talking at the University of Pennsylvania, we were sold. It's just an amazing breakthrough that's out there for patients, particularly with blood cancers, leukemias, and lymphomas. And my medical team was on my side as well, and so it was a really easy decision to go ahead and pursue that. And I'm also like Philip, where I thought, well, the hope is obviously that this will work, but even if it doesn't, they're learning from me, and I want to contribute to science. I want to contribute to help other cancer patients, even if it doesn't help me. And so that is where my heart was.
What were there any financial aside? Obviously, travel is expensive. Were there any surprise costs? Anything that you can share with others that just to be cognizant of?
I wouldn't say we had surprise cost. It was more just my wife, my caregiver over there, was constantly battling with the insurance companies, and typically for the trial for me, my airfare was paid for. Any kind of food expense while I was in MD Anderson was paid for. But again, scans, MRI scans, and CT scans were on us or on the insurance company. And so, as I said, every other Tuesday for 3 years, and every time a scan came up, Susan had to get on the phone and say, these scans are coming up. We have a top-rated doctor, Dr. Tanier, that has said he needs these scans, and the insurance company wanted to argue about whether I should get those scans or not. And it's just that's kind of the frustrating part about it, is just kind of fighting. But as far as a trial went, it was, you mentioned it before that you become a colleague in that group of researchers, because they're like, oh, Philip's here again, and they kind of brushed me on through, and they'd take 15 vials of blood, and and then I'd move on. But and then I'd go get my infusion. So yeah, that was the fun part of it.
Well, it sounds like your wife obviously played an important role in kind of fighting for you in that corner, perhaps when you had other things on your mind to do.
I was a lot thinner.
Yeah.
I was about 190 back then. So.
So I think it just underscores the important role that our friends, loved ones, caregivers, kind of the umbrella term, play. If you're fortunate enough to have someone in your life who's willing to go on this journey with you and to help you, I hear again and again that it really can make the difference in terms of whether or not you get through, or if you keep on until you get to the next thing. Johanna, you and I were talking earlier that it's every trial is that's the next step, and it's you wait and because things are moving so quickly, you do what's available now, and then you wait for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until you go hopefully into remission, no evidence of disease forever.
Yeah.
And what about you?
So for me, given that I was in California, I knew that the highest expense would be, I need to be living in Seattle to receive the treatment. And so my mom immediately got a loan out against the house because she was thinking, we got to pay for something close to the clinic. And then she mentioned something to me. She said, we'll find out if they'll help reimburse for any expenses. And I thought, I don't think so, and I didn't know who to contact. And so, honestly, all I did is I looked at my insurance card. I looked at the back, member services, and I called it. And I said, I got referred to go to a clinical trial. It's out of state. And I didn't know if you offer any assistance. And she said, Kristen, that's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I will look into it and get back to you. And she did. And it came to find out that there was a department within my insurance carrier that handled that for outside referrals. And they gave me the contact, and the person sent me the information. And so they covered, actually, same as Phil, they did the transportation to Seattle to go do the trial, and then for me to come back. They also paid for the housing while we were there, so my mom didn't have to use her mortgage, so they could think we asked. And then they also gave us a per diem per day for food. And it wasn't just for me, but it was for my caregiver. And so my mom was helping me, and then my partner, Benny, who's here today, also was my caregiver during immunotherapy. So that was really, really a blessing. And so I think the biggest takeaway for me is just ask. Just don't feel like you're annoying or, that's what I thought when my mom first told me. I was like, they're not going to pay. But you don't know. I mean, like how much that money that saved us, as a family by doing that. And just asking the question and finding out. Even my oncologist, she asked me once I returned from Seattle, how did you pay to stay out there so long? Because I did 2 clinical trials. And I was like, your insurance paid for it. And she's like, what? I didn't know that. So there's also even a disconnect where your doctor, doesn't know, because that's not what they're focused on. But there are those departments in your insurer that would be able to answer those questions for you.
So your advice is, because that's a great segue into our last question here before we take questions. What advice would you give? And you say ask, always ask about finances. Philip, what would you say is one piece of advice you would give to folks considering entering a clinical trial?
Try to stay focused, and push back a little bit, and ask, and just don't and ask again. That's the best answer. Is
Johanna.
And don't give up. That's kind of the same thing, right? Like they all go together, but you just got to keep going until you get the answers that satisfy you.
Yeah. We know what gets the oil, the squeaky wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your stories with us. I'd like to invite now anyone of you, if you have any questions for the panelists about their experiences participating in an immunotherapy trial, this would be the time to ask. Any questions? Quiet crowd.
Wow. You did such a great job.
Let me ask you a question then. Those of you in the room here who are patients, raise your hand. First, raise your hand if you're a patient, if you feel comfortable doing that. Okay, keep them up. Now, keep your hand up if you've participated in a clinical trial. Look at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
We heard earlier today that statistic that between 4 and 7% of people who are eligible actually enroll in a clinical trial. And for them being such a great resource and potential life-saving opportunity, it's too bad. But I'm glad to hear that, as Lena pointed out earlier, that her perception anyway is that more and more people are becoming interested in clinical trials. And hopefully it's events like this where we bring examples to the patient population that helps increase understanding of what clinical trials are and how they could potentially benefit someone.
Absolutely.
You have a question? Yeah. Here, we're going to bring a microphone up to you.
Because you keep saying that not enough patients are participating in clinical trials, they're hesitant to participate, but I got very interested in immunotherapy trials, vaccine trials, and so far, all the clinical trials I have contacted said they had absolutely no opening spots, there are waiting lists, so my hope, actually, I was very hopeful to get into that type of a trial, not just a chemotherapy, standard chemotherapy, that's more like the trial would work with your immune system. Mm-hmm. Spots are taken, waiting lists, there is nothing. There are some people that I have never even got the response from the clinical coordinator, so it could be a problem too. Plus, it's a targeted medicine right now, so to be eligible for a trial, especially with your immune system, you need to express certain protein, like a very specific criteria, and it takes for the testing to be complete like 6 to 8 weeks. And I asked the clinical trial coordinator, so listen, I'm very interested in your trial, and I will be willing to go for your trial, like you on my list, you're the first on my list, but I'm not sure if I'm expressing this certain protein. And I'm still sort of in remission, and I said, I would like to be tested to know my options when the disease comes back. And they said, no, we can't do it. You have to meet the criteria, you have to have measurable disease, and especially with the CAR T cells, some of them very specific have ovarian cancer, so I don't know how it works with the hematological malignancies, but they're very specific. You have to express certain protein, and you cannot do it I talked to the clinical trial coordinator, you cannot do it on your own, to stay ahead of the game. And there are a few clinical CAR T cells trials for ovarian cancer. But again, you need to make sure you have the specific, not even mutation, it's like a protein expression. And there is no way to know ahead of the time. Let's say you recur, and how much time do you have to get tested? And they all require like archived tumors. So, okay, I can apply for 5 trials, but they may not have enough, at the same time, they may not have enough tissue to get tested for all these trials. So there is a possibility somebody will miss a very potentially life-saving or life-prolonging trial. So I think the immunotherapy trials are very, very popular right now. And whatever vaccines trial I called, no, we don't have any slots. We don't have any openings. There is waiting list. So I'm more like looking for maybe off-label drugs for immunotherapy drugs, or maybe even considering like private clinics in Europe, because I kind of started losing hope and getting enrolled in a very interesting and promising trial. Just a little bit different perspective.
Oh no, you make a really good point. That it's a appalling statistic, but it's not always because patients aren't trying, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the thing that's great about what you just shared is you're persistent, and you're going to keep looking for a trial until you get to one. And I've spoken with many patients who've been on immunotherapy trials, and the ones that are still here to talk to me are the ones who remain determined to find that trial and get to the next thing. Mm-hmm. So I think you're in a good spot, and I hope that you do find a trial that works for you very soon. Yeah. There's a question back there.
All right. No one mentions nutrition. And how does that play in it? If the father of medicine says food is medicine and medicine is food, since most of our food we eat is poisoned, How does that work with what you're working on now?
Yeah, I'm going to turn that over to one of our experts to talk about. Dr. Vonderheide, or Dr. Postow, do you want to take the nutrition question? It is a question that we get, especially when you think of the immune system and the supplements and things that you do to try to stay healthy. It would seem like it plays a role, and actually it does. But I'd like to let one of our experts address that. Dr. Postow.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think we would all believe that there is something about nutrition or being healthy or some exercise or some other way that things that we can do in our daily life that will increase our opportunity to benefit from all these opportunities. It's very difficult to study this in a very rigorous scientific way to be proven or certain of certain foods and other things that are absolutely proven to be beneficial in certain contexts, at least while we're on trials with immune therapy drugs. So I think it remains an active area of interest. I tell my patients that a general healthy lifestyle can only help them in general anyways, and so that's a good thing if that's something you're interested in. But a piece of pizza from time to time tastes really great as well. So,
Yay.
I think we have to realize that we're living life and we're doing the things we can. I know patients have questions about sugar, and if I restrict myself from sugar, will that make starve the cancer cells? Unfortunately, that's not something that's clear. So I don't suggest patients have really strict kind of very difficult diets. I think the more important thing is to maintain weight, maintain a normal, healthy, balanced diet, and there's a lot that's out there about some kind of super cancer-fighting food, and we don't really quite know a lot about that just quite yet.
Let me ask our panelists, was nutrition or diet one of the things that you had to discuss with your doctors?
Yeah. I'm 6'3", and I was down to about 190 pounds, and my wife was cooking very, 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 very healthy. I mean, she can tell you about it, but yeah, my doctor told her to stop, and that I needed to eat and gain weight. So, and of course that went a little long, I think.
How about for Andy, right?
For Andy, it wasn't so much about food, it was the exercise piece of the equation. And so where Janie was talking about her trial that I think 80%, you said, of people in your trial did well, Andy's trial was not so successful. So for IPI and prostate, it wasn't so good. But what they found in all the cases of people that were doing well was they were people who were working out, basically, and staying healthy. And they said for future trials, that was in fact going to be one of the prerequisites. You couldn't sign up for the trial if you weren't willing to do their exercise regimen. So I found that really interesting. Andy walks everywhere. He's pretty good. They didn't talk so much about his food, but making sure that he was working out was really important.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Marissa's got a question.
Hi. So my question was more so just about making the decision to participate in a trial, particularly for those of you who had to travel. When you have a terminal diagnosis, you have to make tough decisions. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about leaving your family or going somewhere else at a time where you might want to be with those people in case it didn't pay off.
Go for it.
For me, it was interesting because Susan traveled with me, and we were one of the lucky ones. We actually had a friend that had a house in Galveston, so we were lucky enough to stay in Galveston most of the time, not all the time, but so yeah, that was our experience. But and we didn't, like I said, Susan was with me all the time. So.
For us, we have a teenage son, and trust me, somebody has to be home with him just to make sure things are going okay.
Yeah.
So we ended up splitting up a lot. So I almost didn't go. I went to some of the early appointments in Texas, but after that, Andy went, and I would stay home with Zach. But I was always on the conference calls. But yeah, it was a decision that we had to make. But the benefit outweighed the fear of missing out, I guess. So that's how we made our decision, and that's how we dealt with it, and still deal with it. Andy goes pretty much by himself, and then we have a conference call with the doctor that I'm always on. So,
Kristen.
Yeah, and then for me, luckily I was very fortunate to have either my mother or my boyfriend with me while I was out in Seattle the whole time. They would take shifts on and off for work. So I was very fortunate that way. And then also where we were living, Fred Hutch has other cancer patients are able to stay there, so you get reduced living costs. So you meet friends that are, some people are doing immunotherapy, some people are getting active treatment for different things. So we had that. And then I've just been fortunate. I have such a huge support system. So I got tons of holiday decorations in the mail and cards. And so and people were always texting me. And so I never really felt like I was really far away. It was time for me to really focus on fighting cancer. And so I had love surrounded around me, and I became friends with everyone. The medical community, when you're treated, you become friends with them, and they're your new family too.
Absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question. Yep, okay.
Yeah, my name's Anna. My son at 46, got diagnosed with prostate cancer in March. He's got a young family. His PSA was 106, and that blew us out of the water. And I have two questions for Joanna. One is, do you or your husband, do you network with other folks that are living with prostate cancer? I know there are some, sites. One in particular that's pretty amazing. And the other thing is, the problem with prostate cancer is men. My son does not. I mean, I love men, don't get me wrong, I have a husband, but he doesn't speak up. And when he first got diagnosed, his urologist at one point was really being, not a nice guy. Like, he had to go away, and he was going to make them wait for these results from the biopsy. And my son didn't say anything, but my daughter-in-law told him off. And then he straightened up, And so myself, my son, my other son, and Anasha's wife have really been important in this journey. And I just wanted you to address those two things, networking and about being the partner of a man with prostate cancer.
It's a tough deal, man, let me tell you. I feel your pain. Andy is actually, he was very vocal with his urologist and just didn't get, he was vocal, but he wasn't pushy. How about that? He was talking about his symptoms. He was going in all the time, but it's exactly what you said. You have to get to this point where if you're not getting what, you don't feel like you're getting what you need, and you somehow deep down you know that, right? That you've got to push, and often it is the partners and the daughter-in-laws, and those are the people that push. So for all of us that are lucky enough to have that kind of, for me, my mom and my sister and everybody, to have that, use it. And if you're there, that's the biggest role I think you can play. We have not done networking and probably should. We did this event in San Francisco, and I met with a bunch of people, and they were so great, and they were all part of a networking group for prostate cancer that they love. So it'd be great to get Andy to do that. I'm not sure how that would go. I could give it a try, though. But so hopefully that answers your question.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our panelists.